Elves and Magic have a rich history with dozens of legendaries to choose from for Commander, and I've tried out many of them over the years. The most typical approach is to be mono green with Azuri, Renegade Leader, Eladamri, Lord of Leaves, Freydalize, Llanowar's Fury, to go green-white with Selvala, Explorer Returned, or Rise the Redeemed, green-black with Nath of the Gilt Leaf, green-blue with Azuri Claw of Progress. Heck, even Leovold, Emissary of Trest, was a viable Elf Ball commander, before he got banned for his more nefarious applications. But prior to the printing of Grand Warlord Radha, there wasn't really a great synergistic legendary for red-green elves. And while Gruul isn't usually well known for an elf combination, it surprisingly turns out to be very powerful in Commander, with red shoring up many of green's weaknesses. Grand Warlord Radha is too generic, a red and a green for a legendary elf warrior. She's 3/4 with haste, and she has the ability, whenever one or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. In my opinion, Radha is quite possibly one of the best elf commanders there is. There are many ways you can take this inherently aggressive ability, but I believe the best way is through building elves, and I'm going to talk here about Radha as a new take on the venerable elf ball archetype. Radha's mana production, along with a dose of red aggression and combo, give us an explosive elf swarm that can overwhelm even a commander battlefield. Let's talk about the baseline elf package for Commander, applicable to any green-based elf deck. Now, if you're familiar with elves in Modern or Legacy, you know the basic strategy. You play a bunch of small elves that make mana, ramp out larger creatures, and finally pump everyone to smash in for a win. Our deck begins with the oldest trick in Green's spell book, Llanowar Elves. Getting a turn ahead on mana has always been powerful, and as an elf deck, we can make good use of the 1/1 creature later in the game. While Commander is singleton, there have been enough functional reprints over the years to give us a full suite of mana dorks. Elvish Mystic and Findhorn Elves are exact copies, while Arbor Elf and Boreal Druid are close enough. Jiraga Tree Speaker is a weird variant that takes a bit more investment, utilizing the level up mechanic to eventually make an absurd amount of mana. Heritage Druid turns all our elves into hasty Llanowar elves, so long as we tap them in groups of 3. We also have some options for fetching lands with Wood Elves and Farhaven Elf. Getting an elf body out of our rampant growth is well worth it in this deck. Getting an elf body along with our rampant growth is well worth it in this deck. The new Llanowar tribe from Modern Horizons is literally just 3 Llanowar elves stapled together, giving us major ramp as well as a beefy body. We get paid off for keeping our ramp elf-based with Priest of Titania and Elvish Archdruid, who both tap to add mana equal to the number of elves you control, which gets out of hand very quickly. Marwyn, the Nurturer, pulls a similar trick, but instead powers up as we cast our elves. Mirror of the Forebearers is a versatile artifact that can copy any elf for cheap, but it's at its best copying one of these big mana elves for a massive turn. But we're not going to win simply by casting one elf at a time. We need to flood the board. Dwynen's Elite is an elf that comes along with a friend, so long as we already have an elf, which we generally will. And Lys Alana Huntmaster makes all of our future elves come along with a friend. Imperious Prefect, who is somehow not a prefect, can pump out elves turn after turn. And Freydalize, Llanowar's Fury, is an on-theme planeswalker that ticks up to produce a steady stream of Llanowar elves. Elvish Promenade is a one-shot way to double up our board, and due to the weird tribal mechanic from Lorwyn, it is technically an elf spell itself. We also need ways to refill our hands, since board wipes are a hard reality we need to face. In this capacity, we have Elvish Visionary, the simple elf that draws us a card. But what if all our creatures did that? The traditional elf engine is Glimpse of Nature, which lets us draw a card every time we cast a creature, which is amazingly powerful. If your deck is low to the ground, Glimpse can be a good include, but in Commander we can invest a bit more to get a permanent version of the effect. Beast Whisperer is the perfect card for this deck, being Glimpse of Nature tacked onto an elf. And Guardian Project is the same thing on an enchantment with a mostly irrelevant downside in a singleton format. Vanquisher's Banner is 1 more mana and is restricted to elves, but it also gives a nice power and toughness buff. Lifecrafter's Bestiary forces us to pay for our card draw, but we at least get a free scry every turn. Soul of the Harvest and Primordial Sage are even more copies of the effect, but given all the new, cheaper versions of the effect, they've become sadly superfluous. I still have a soft spot for Regal Force, the big fatty that can refill our hand once we've established our board. Kindred Summons from the recent Tribal Precons is another amazing value play, letting us spew elves out of our deck straight onto the battlefield if we manage to cast it with a full board. The other way we can keep our hand full is with some graveyard recursion. This deck hits hard, and it's going to force your opponents to board wipe, so expect that inevitability. When it happens, it's time to lay low for a while and rebuild. Wildest Dreams and Seasons Past let you get your elves back to your hand en masse, which can set up for a bit next turn. Praetor's Council is an ambitiously costed version of this effect, but getting to draw your entire graveyard is supremely powerful, and Radha's ability can help you spike that 8 mana. How does this deck win? With our army of elves assembled, we need ways to pump up our army of tiny elves into a fearsome fighting force. There are, of course, a bunch of simple elf lords that give +1/+1, such as Dwynen, but we can expect a bit more for our win conditions. Timberwatch Elf pumps up a single elf and makes blocking miserable for our opponents. Immaculate Magistrate does the same thing, but permanently with +1/+1 counters. Jiraga Warcaller is a lord that pumps your team based on its +1/+1 counters. See a combo there? Azuri Renegade Leader lets you protect your elves and also pay mana to overrun, which too goes incredibly well with Radha's ability. Eldamri, Lord of Leaves, protects our elves and makes them unblockable against any opponent foolish enough to challenge our dominance of the forest. Beyond the world of elves, Beastmaster Ascension is a classic way to make your team massive. If you attack with 7 elves the turn you play it, you're good to go. Door of Destinies takes a few turns to charge up, but soon enough it will be giving you massive buffs. Coat of Arms is kind of the opposite. You really don't want to play it unless you're going to clearly win that turn. In addition to the effect being symmetrical, the per creature per shared creature type buff is a nightmare to track on any non-trivial board state. So get ready to break out a spreadsheet and hire an accountant. But the classic elf finisher is none other than the iconic big green monster, Craterhoof Behemoth. While 8 mana is a lot, pumping your creatures based on the number of creatures you control adds up quadratically, and giving trample can push through damage even in the face of blockers. The Hoof Daddy can let you find lethal when no other effect would, but the card has gotten rather pricey as of late. Endray's Forerunners is a newly printed alternative that does a passable impression. What about Answers? As an aggro deck, we don't have much room for answers, which works out well since green doesn't have too many of them to begin with. Reclamation Sage is an artifact and enchantment destruction stapled onto an elf, which is fine for us. Song of the Dryads and Beast Within are mono-green color pie bending answers to arbitrary permanents. Heroic Intervention is our only real answer to board wipe, but when it works and you're the only one who gets to keep your creatures, it can be game over level devastation. Tutors. To tie the deck together, we have access to green's extensive tutor package. In terms of elves, Elvish Harbinger lets us set up an elf for next turn. Fierce Empath lets us tutor up Craterhoof for any of our other big monsters. And Fauna Shaman is survival of the fittest on an elf, letting us swap a creature in our hand for whatever we need. Beyond that, we have the usual staples of Green Sun Zenith, Worldly Tutor, and Chord of Calling. Chord works especially well with Radha's ability, letting us attack and use the generated mana to grab the Hoof monster as as an instant speed overrun. Joining the Pantheon is the new Finale of Devastation, which has the upside where if we've lost access to Crater Hoof somehow, with enough mana it can just grab any old creature and give you access to a massive overrun effect. Alright, so let's talk adding red mana. While our elf package is basically mono green, there are a few standout red elves that we get to run in our Gruul deck. The original Radha is a solid mana dork that works with our attacking theme. Bloodbraid Elf is solid value, cascading into something, hopefully another elf. Mina and Den is a budget Oracle of Moldiah, and if you know the price on Oracle of Moldiah, you are happy there is a budget option, getting us the extra land drop. Tana, the Bloodsower, produces Saproling tokens, which sadly aren't elves, but still work well with Radha's ability. But the real payoff for adding red is a new card from Guilds of Ravnica, Experimental Frenzy. If you've been following Standard at all, well, you know Teferi can go tuck himself, but you also know that this card can be absurd, allowing you to chain spells off the top of your library until you hit a glut of lands or run out of mana. The elf strategy I've outlined has lots of little synergies with Frenzy. You can use Heritage Druid to tap your summoning sick elves to keep the train rolling, and Mina and Den let us get through any land clumps that might slow us down. Or of course Oracle of Moldiah if you're made of money. Rhythm of the Wild is another payoff, and again it works in a lot of surprising ways. It makes your creatures uncounterable, can give haste to your mana dorks, put another counter on your Jiraga Warcaller, and so on. Sadly, the Gruul colors don't have much in the way of general purpose tutors, so you'll only get to enjoy these enchantments when you happen to naturally draw them. Reap the Past is a new addition from Modern Horizons, getting us back our dead elves at a better rate than the mono-green options, with some randomness thrown in to balance it out. This seems like a great trade-off to me. Oftentimes, we'll cast it with enough mana to get back our entire graveyard anyway. Combo. Grand Lord Radha and her ability bring along two infinite combat step cards, Aggravated Assault and Hellkite Charger. If you have enough creatures attacking, you can use Radha's ability to pay for the extra combat step on either of these cards and just keep attacking forever. Anyone without blockers will fall to your Elvish Horde immediately. But then things get interesting, and it will take some serious planning and good timing to actually pull off a win with this combo. The other combo in the deck is the venerable Earthcraft Squirrel Nest combo. Since both pieces work so well on their own in the deck, Earthcraft is an old and pricey enchantment that lets your creatures tap to untap a basic land, even when they're summoning sick. Squirrel Nest enchants a land and makes squirrels, which certainly seems unassuming, but if you enchant a basic land, you can make a squirrel, use it, and Earthcraft to untap your land and repeat until you have infinite squirrels. If no one has an answer, they'll face an onslaught of bushy tails and beady eyes on your next turn. As usual, you'll want to follow my 2-color mana base video, but be sure to skew your basics heavily in favor of green, since getting an elf out on turn 1 is so important in this deck. There's a ton of sweet utility lands you can add to really power the deck up. Obviously, Cavern of Souls fixes your mana while making your elves uncounterable. Path of Ancestry gives you some serious scry value. Wirewood Lodge can let you untap one of your big mana elves for an extra burst. Ichthos, Shrine to Nyx, can get you a ton of mana once you've got a few elves on the board. No, I'm not seriously gonna recommend Gaia's Cradle, unless of course you're playing on Magic Online where it's affordable. But I mean, if you've got one in your collection, throw in a Gaia's Cradle, because why not? On the more realistic side, Growing Rites of Itlamok does a reasonable impression at a fraction of the cost. And if you've got sufficient sweet lands to find, Crop Rotation, Expedition Map, and Sylvan Scrying are the easiest ways to find them. Grand Warlord Radha hasn't gotten a ton of attention as a commander, but at the helm of an elf ball army, she is a force to be reckoned with, and I hope people will try this deck out, because I think it's a hidden gem. And I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. What deck should I do a tech on next? Let me know in the comments below. And this program was made possible thanks to a sponsorship from Card Kingdom, as well as the Patreon support of viewers such as you. So thank you.